Proverbs chapter 1, verses 1 to 7. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. For gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behaviour, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. For understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. I'm going to be moving over to Proverbs 8, chapter 8 that is, verses 10 through to 16. Choose my instruction instead of silver, knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her. I, wisdom, dwell together with prudence. I possess knowledge and discretion. To fear the Lord is to hate evil. I hate pride and arrogance, evil behavior and perverse speech. Counsel and sound judgment are mine. I have insight, I have power. By me kings reign, and rulers issue decrees that are just. By me princes govern, and nobles all who rule on earth. And finally, we're going to be going over to verses 22 to 31. The Lord brought me forth as the first of his works, before his deeds of old. I was formed long ago, at the very beginning, when the world came to be. When there were no watery depths, I was given birth. When there were no springs overflowing with water, before the mountains were settled in place, before the hills I was given birth. Before he made the world or its fields or any of the dust of the earth, I was there when he set the heavens in place, when he marked out the horizon on the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above and fixed securely the fountains of the deep, when he gave the sea its boundary so that the waters would not overstep his command, and when he marked out the foundations of the earth. Then I was constantly at his side. I was filled with delight day after day, rejoicing always in his presence, rejoicing in his whole world, and delighting in the human race.
The first picture on the screen is not me, but it's there for means of illustration. When I was young, a lot younger, I didn't quite look like this, but I was involved in the same activity. I used to love taking things apart. You can choose whatever it was. My favourite destruction was a radio, an old radio that was no good for anything ever more other than a Saturday morning's fun for me with a screwdriver, taking it apart. There's always a few screws left over when you put it back together, but that's a story that I'll tell you another time. But whether it was a radio, whether it was something from the kitchen, whether in the modern world it's an iPad or an iPhone, I like taking things apart, not because I'm destructive. There is part of my character that loves to just destroy things, but that wasn't what was happening here. That's the point. I love knowing how things work. I love taking things apart, exploring, working out what things do what and how things work and how things can be improved, that type of things. Many people recognize that making the same observation of life is really difficult. You can take a radio apart, you can take a car apart, you can take a lawnmower apart, a hairdryer apart, anything you like, and you can kind of work out, oh, there's a broken fuse, I can fix that. But when it comes to life, it's far more complicated. It's far more difficult to work out how life works, why things happen, sometimes why things don't work. And there's always a fair dollop of pain involved when you look at your life. There's been a shift in society since the 19th century when it was widely recognized in the UK that the predominant belief in culture and society was that we lived under God's loving hand, his provision and rule. 19th century. Then there was a shift from that widely held belief that God rules over all to there is no God at all. And if God were to exist, he is unkind and he is cruel. It's been a massive shift from the 19th century, 18th, 17th century and so on. So you move from belief in God to unbelief, and now there's belief in me. Belief in me. God does not exist, and if he does, he's cruel and unkind. It's a far better world if I live under my own autonomous, self-sovereign rule. But the problem with that is that it doesn't work when it comes to life. If we live under our own sovereign rule, it does not work, and people are beginning to see that it's unlivable. You will make an absolute mess of your life, says the book of Proverbs, unless you understand how life works. That's where Christians go to gain wisdom, the whole Bible, but a book of Proverbs. But other people can go to lots of different places. Here on the screen, you can see a lot of sources where you can turn to for wisdom. I want to see how life works, so I'm going to follow some influences. I want to understand how my life works, so I'm going to listen to Jordan Peterson, especially young men. I want to see how life works, so I'm going to buy a book by Roxy Nefosi. She is the manifesting queen, if you've not heard of her. She's sold millions of books. No, I don't enjoy her writing. I'm going to turn to Brené Brown. She's in the middle at the top. Brené Brown is self-help. She's sold tens of millions of books, and they've been translated into 30 different languages. She has great influence. There are many other places as well, but the point is this. I took apart a radio to see how it worked. But when it comes to your life, well, who do you turn to understand how life works? In the middle of the Bible, there are 3 books that work together. They're called the wisdom literature. As a parody, just imagine 3 men around a fire. One of them's called Proverbs, one of them's called Ecclesiastes, and the other one's called Job. 3 wise men. The book of Proverbs would be a young man who's seen something of life. Solomon, who wrote most of the Proverbs. It's full of wisdom about marriage, about work, about finance, about raising children, about how you live healthily and how you live a relationally fruitful life. That's the book of Proverbs. But then you turn to this slightly older man he's Ecclesiastes. He's at least in his 40s, if not 50, with a few grey hairs. And he's Solomon as well, at a different stage of his life. And he's looking at life and it's just a bit more cynical. And then there's the book of Job. That would be the 3rd person around the campfire, the 3rd wisdom writer. And he is towards the end of his life, and it's one of the oldest books in the Bible, and he is a testimony to God's goodness. When everything is taken away, to whom do you turn? And Job says God is faithful through the ups and downs of life and some very, very difficult and dark and the deepest trials that he experienced. This morning we're going to look at the book of Proverbs. 1 Kings 3 and 1 Kings 4, God turns up in the life of Solomon and says, ask me anything you want. And Solomon says, I would love to be wise. Give me a discerning heart. 1 Kings chapter 3. 1 Kings 4, and so God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight and a breadth of understanding greater than any of the Egyptian wise men. And as great, it's not greater than all the sands on the seashore. He's a man of great wisdom. And Proverbs is the fruit of his wisdom. Let's think about the value of wisdom, the problem of wisdom, and the wisdom of God. The value of wisdom, the problem of wisdom, and the wisdom of God. Look down at chapter 8, please, and verse 10. We're jumping in, we're breaking all the rules. We're not starting at the beginning, but we're looking at the high view of the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 8, verse 10. Wisdom is speaking, and wisdom says, I am more important than silver, than gold, than jewels. And finally, a few sentences later, nothing you desire can compare to her. In your life, many decisions need to be made, and they only require knowledge. Which watch do I buy? Which car do I buy? Do I buy a car? Do I lease it? I just need to know the data. Sometimes knowledge is enough. Choose the right medicine. If you just have enough knowledge, then you can choose the right medicine that you can take, and so on. Other times you need principles and values to make the right decision, but the vast majority of decisions every single day is not solely based on knowledge or convictions. It's an issue of wisdom. It's an issue of wisdom. It's not just principles. Who do you marry? Should I get married? Who do you date? Should you break up? What career shall I go into? Is it time to move on? Should I move here? Should I confront the person that said that? Should I not? Should I take a risk? Should I play it safe? They're all issues of wisdom before midday on a Monday. There's so much, not just knowledge, but wisdom. And one of the reasons we so frequently feel sick in our stomachs is because we're faced with something in our lives and we think, I know that I'm in this situation, but I don't know what to do. What's the right decision to make? Matrix, red pill, blue pill. What should I do? And I don't want to get it wrong. The Proverbs say wisdom is of greatest value. It's of great or greatest value. Nothing you desire compares to her. Of greater value than silver and gold, material wealth, a healthy bank balance. Of more value than that is the principle of wisdom, being a wise woman, being a wise man. Sell all you have to get wisdom. Look down at verses 12 to 16 as the passage continues. Verse 12, I, wisdom, dwell with prudence. I have insight, or you might have the word knowledge. In this section, there are synonyms. It's poetry, the book of Proverbs. But it tells you how things really work. And as an overview, there are 3 words here that are going to be repeated throughout the book of Proverbs. So I just want to draw attention to verse 12 and the word insight or knowledge. This word means you know from God how things really work. You know how things really work. You know that if you do not get a job, you do not deserve to eat, for example. You know that if you are a sluggard, you don't just need to be reinforced in your laziness, you need to look at the ant. It's one of the great Proverbs. So knowing how things work, that's this issue of knowledge and insight. Verse 12 again, I, wisdom, dwell with prudence. Here's the word that Sherlock Holmes helps us to understand. Whether it's Benedict Cumberbatch, whether it's someone else, but Benedict Cumberbatch, he goes into a room when he's playing Sherlock Holmes. It's the same room that Watson has been into. It's the same room that other people have been into. And yet, because he's Sherlock Holmes, he notices the most tiny details. And then the screen kind of does some amazing thing with some cinematography, and you see how his brain works, and you see all the details that show you it was her that did it, or whatever it was. That's the word here to do with prudence, noticing the little distinctions of life. Sherlock Holmes walks into the room, it's an absolute mess, but he sees a fingerprint, he sees a clue, and he pieces together and he solves the crime, so to speak. Seeing the little things in life. Lastly, down to verse 15. By me, kings reign and rulers decree the right things. So these 3 words together shows that wisdom, what is it? Not only is it of uttermost value for you to understand how life works. Wisdom is this, not just knowing how things really work, not just knowing how things really are, but also what you should do about it. An O for some wise leaders. So it's worth pursuing and it's of uttermost value. Wisdom, the value of it. Then there's the problem of it. What do I mean by that? Notice the problem of wisdom. Let me explain. We have this great problem that we know that we long for wisdom, but wisdom is very hard to come by. It's hard to find. So many people have different points of view. Look down to verse 22 of chapter 8. I was with the Lord when the Lord made absolutely everything. Then there's the list of the seas and the mountains. Before the mountains were made, I was with him. Before the seas, I was with him. When he made the sea, when he made human beings and so on, I was with him. I was there. Everything was made with wisdom, says chapter 8. Now what's interesting is this. When you zoom out, Eastern societies view the material world as basically an illusion, historically. Western society, their views of creation are very different. Whether you go to the Norse gods, whether you go to the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, they view creation as the gods fighting each other, and from that creation came. Or it's gods fighting beasts, and from that creation came. It's always the result of a power struggle, east and west. Here's what's interesting. This passage says to us that that's not true. The Bible claims that God created the world. Wisdom was there from the beginning. The world is orderly. The world is good. It's not a random accident. It's not based on a power struggle, but creation was based on wisdom. The wisdom of God. Here you have, down in verse 30, God delighting as a craftsman, as an artist, with the beauty of the world that's been made. Verse 30, I rejoiced always before him. There's an overwhelming joy. God designed the world as a place of beauty, of power, and of order. There's a pattern to the created world, and there's joy and order and peace that can be found. And wisdom rejoices always in that's God's presence. So God created the world. It's not an illusion. It's not because God's fought or God's versus animals or beasts fought and from it creation was made. It's not a random collection of electrons and neutrons. It is, in fact, a pattern to the God's world. It's not random. And if that is true, if wisdom made the world, Proverbs chapter 8, then wisdom can be seen in the pattern of the world. Wisdom can be seen in the pattern of the world, and wise living, therefore, is living according to the pattern of the Creator. See the logic? Here's some examples. Have you ever been down to Worthing and seen people struggling to disprove the laws of aerodynamics? Here's a picture on the screen, and you can see that there are rules when it comes to aerodynamics. What goes up must come down. If you disregard those rules, you will see that you will get very, very wet if you're at the end of Worthing Pier trying to be an acrobat or the bird man or the bird woman. There's a physical reality and you crash because there's a pattern to the world. It's true for our relationships. There is a wise way of living. It's true also spiritually, how your heart operates under the fear of the Lord that we'll look at in weeks to come. There's foolishness to go against the grain. There's wisdom to go with the grain, with the pattern. Think of a piece of wood. Think of a piece of wood. You can do no harm. It's the right thing to do if you go with the grain with your hand. There's a beauty to wood. There's a smoothness to it. There's a texture to it. You go against the grain, you're going to get a splinter. And that's what Solomon is saying in the book of Proverbs. Here's how to avoid splinters. Here's how to see that there's a pattern to God's good world. And there are two things you need to see in order to be wise. Here's the problem that we face. The first thing you have to do is to admit that there is a pattern to God's world. There are principles that God has put in place. There is a patchwork quilt to the nature of the created order. It's no accident that we are on our axis as orbiting the sun at 22.5 degrees, because it's just enough sun for the seasons. There are principles that God has put into this world, listen carefully, that normally apply. But on the other hand, you've also got to see, if God has made this world, he is God and I'm not. And that means you cannot see everything. You cannot know it all. There are big parts of how this world works that are hidden from us. And so we have to trust him. And this is how the book works. Chapters 1 to 9. Chapters 1 to 9 are like the introduction, where Solomon is saying, my son, this is what I've learned. Basically, at the start of every chapter, chapters 1 through 8, there is my son listen, my son accept, my son keep, my son understand. This is what I've learned. You meet characters like Lady Wisdom, Lady Folly, the adulteress, the fool, the wise person. You meet all these characters. It's a bit like EastEnders, but it's in the Bible. That's chapters 1 to 9. It's like a big introduction. Listen, this is the value, this is the importance, this is the life-giving nature of understanding what it means to fear the Lord. Then you get to chapter 10. Beginning in chapter 10 and following, you start to have what are traditionally known as Proverbs. They are the travel suites of life that you take one sentence. Sometimes it's one sentence that you just need to suck upon in your spirit. You need to digest. You need to think about. Is that true? What does it mean to me? How might it apply to my life? Sometimes they work in pairs, where you get the yin and the yang, so to speak. You get the truth statement, and then you get the opposite if you don't live in this way. That's chapters 10 and following. What is interesting in chapters 10 to 15, however, is this. These are principles by which life normally works. If you work hard, you prosper. If you're lazy, you'll be poor. If you live according to moral absolutes, your life will go well with you. If you live a wicked life, your life won't go well. If you raise a child according to this pattern, if you raise a child rightly, then when she or he is old, they will love you. That's chapters 10 to 15. But then you get to chapter 16. When you get to chapter 16, suddenly you begin to see exceptions to those normalities of how life normally works. For example, some people who live according to God's moral absolutes have a very difficult life. Example, Job. Then it says some people who, though they work really hard, they stay poor because they've been oppressed. So there's a complexity to life living under God's rule, trusting in his provision. And that's all in the wisdom literature. And here's the problem of wisdom. If you will not admit there's a pattern to the world, a grain to God's world, if you don't submit to God's loving rules, if you live outside of his care, then the Proverbs say you're living foolishly. You're living like a fool. Because there is a pattern to the world. It's the wisdom of God. And that's the final point. What is the solution to the problem of wisdom that we look to all these different sources to garner and to gain? It's the wisdom of God. Back to chapter 8. In chapter 8, we recognize it's a piece of poetry. And notice the basic point of this section is that wisdom is personified. Wisdom is personified. This concept, this theme, this existential word of wisdom is actually personified. And so you see in the opening sentences, I, she, me, my, and so on. An abstract quality is turned into a person. Well, you can kind of say, well, that's great. Keats could do that. It's just a wonderful piece of poetic speech. Well, the thing is, this book is written as a manual, not for solitary understanding and study. In all probability, this was written as a manual to be read in groups of young men and young people from a father to a son. This is what I've learned with the world. Let's get together, let's think about these topics and themes, and let's discuss it as a group. In all probability, that's how it was to be engaged with. Not solitude, but study in a group. If you didn't have a wise parent, if you didn't have a wise tutor or teacher or mentor, you could become wise by hearing the words of the Proverbs discussed. That's one of the reasons why these chapters begin as they do. Look back to chapter 1, verse 8. Chapter 1, verse 8, listen, my son, to your father's instruction. Chapter 2, verse 1, my son, if you accept my words and store them up within you. Chapter 3, verse 1, my son, do not forget my teaching. Keep my commands in your heart. They will prolong your life. And so on. Chapter 5, verse 1. My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Listen well to my words of insight, that you may maintain discretion and preserve knowledge. Wisdom is portrayed as a smart, elegant woman who calls out to the foolish men and women on the streets to say, come and listen. And there's a great contrast between the lady of foolishness and folly, the adulteress with honeyed lips, and the woman who calls out from the same place at the high point of the street, at the high point of the town, saying, come and listen to me, don't listen to her. There's a way that leads to death, there's a way that leads to life. Here's the point. Wisdom is not a life hack. Wisdom is not a matter of mastering a certain bank of knowledge or a bunch of rules, 10 rules to live by. That's not what it's talking about. Wisdom is portrayed as a woman. And the reason for that, I believe, is this. You need to have a love affair, so to speak, with wisdom. Wisdom and the pursuit of wisdom needs to be the desire of your heart. You need to long for, you need to value, you need to search for wisdom. For the wisdom that will give you life. The wisdom that will help you understand not a radio, but how life works. The priorities of life. What you should pursue with your heart's ambitions. How you should use your resources and your time in your best years. Just imagine if wisdom was actually the wisdom of God was a person you could know. The wisdom of God was a person you could love, if you could have a relationship with. And knowing this person would make you wise. Just imagine that. If this relationship that you could have with the ultimate guide, with the ultimate teacher, with the ultimate mentor, perhaps you've always longed for and you've never had in your life? What about if you could have a relationship with not a great counselor, but with the wonderful counselor? Maybe that sounds just too far-fetched. Here's what's interesting as I've gone into Proverbs this week. Alongside this nearly 3,000-year-old book, there is a bunch of other wise teachers and wise literature in Israel. The wisdom of the son of Sirach is one I've come across this week. The son of Sirach is on the screen. Listen to this. Turn unto me, you who are untaught. Why do you say you're lacking in these things? Why are your souls so thirsty? I say to you, find wisdom. Put your necks under its yoke and bear its burden. If you are intent, you can find wisdom. See with your eyes that I have labored for it, and I have found my soul much rest. That's kind of a typical wisdom phrase, whether you think of it as biblical or outside of the Bible. We can talk about that another time. But isn't it interesting that centuries later, another teacher, another rabbi called Jesus said these words that are very different. Come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I'm meek and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. How similar those statements sound. How different they are. The son of Sirach says, get the yoke, get discipline, get training, and then you'll get rest if you do this. Jesus says, come to me. Come to me, take my yoke upon you, learn of me, and I will give you rest for your souls. There's all the difference in the world with those two statements. Jesus is saying, I'm the wisdom of God. I'm the wisdom of God personified. A relationship with me will make you wise. Knowing me, you know the wisdom of God. You know how the world works. Wisdom is not a body of knowledge or principles to memorize. It's a relationship with the one who is there at the foundation of the world. It's knowing Jesus, living for him, loving him, learning from him. It's the only way you won't be exhausted in life, and only he can give you rest. And right at the beginning of John's Gospel, this very famous sentence, or 14 sentences that we read every year at Christmas, it says this: the poetry of Proverbs points us forward to the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word. That's the Greek word logos, which is hand and glove, wisdom. It's a philosophical term for wisdom. Here's how you could translate it, and it's very close. In the beginning was the wisdom of God. The wisdom was with God, and the wisdom was God. Nothing was made without him. The wisdom of God became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. Glory as of the only begotten of the Father, filled with grace and truth. Here's the secret to wisdom. Here's not how the radio works. Here's how life works. In the beginning, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit had a perfect love relationship. They rejoiced in each other, just as wisdom rejoiced with the Father as he created the world as a craftsman. They rejoiced, they glorified, they enjoyed, they loved, and from that love as an overflow, as a fountain overflowing, they created the world so that we could share in it, so that we could enjoy the relationship that we're made for. And here's 3 really quick applications to close. When Jesus came to earth, he says this: I'm the wisdom of God to you. I'm the wisdom of God to you. Jesus is not an airtight argument, said Dick Lucas, a minister up in London a few decades ago. He's not an ultimate argument, he's an airtight person. If you're new to Christian things, if you're not sure if Christianity is true, can I encourage you, can I urge you? You will not find out if Christianity is true unless you investigate the person of Jesus and his claims. Read a gospel, get together with a group of friends, get into community, and seek to understand the claims of Jesus. That's the only way. He's the wisdom of God to us. AI will not help very much at all. Look at his words, look at his deeds, listen to his claims, because Jesus is the wisdom of God to us. Secondly, he's the wisdom of God for us, the wisdom of God for us. Every other sage, every other teacher who ever lived says, do this and God will be pleased with you. Do this is the right way to live. Jesus says something completely different. He says, this is how you should live, and I've lived the life for you. I've lived a life in your stead, in your place, even unto death and resurrection. Jesus lived the life we should have lived. He died the death that we deserved. And so now God can accept us because of him. That is unique. Jesus is the wisdom of God to us and for us. Lastly, he's the wisdom of God with us. He's the wisdom of God with us. At the heart of Christianity is the cross of Jesus. And you can look at the cross of Jesus, as many of Jesus' disciples did, and say, on the cross, what is God doing? That does not make sense. But then there was the resurrection. And that's the ultimate example of looking at something in life, in your life, and saying, I cannot see what God is doing, but I know that he's wise, and I want to trust him. Jesus is the wisdom of God to us, for us, and with us. Do you want rest? Who doesn't? Do you want rest for your soul? Seek to understand the cross. Seek to understand the gospel. Seek to understand Jesus Christ, because he alone gives you wisdom, and only that wisdom gives you rest. Let's pray.